Crowd-funded projects. These can sometimes be quite hit or miss, even though 90% of the time it's really just a miss, as these typically have very big promises and then just under-deliver or don't deliver at all. And that's what I will be talking about in today's video, a crowd-funded project. So this is the Titum headphone by Titum Audio, and it is one of those big promise products. Now I'm going to do this in two parts. This is the first video of the review. I'm going to be covering the more quantifiable aspects of the product today, and in a future video I will cover how it actually sounds from a more subjective standpoint. So for those of you in the audio hobby, if you are the more objective sort, you probably won't need the follow-up video. But I think this headphone actually has something that could be interesting for both sides. So this is a Bluetooth noise cancelling headphone. Most crowdfunded headphones are. And you can still see the Indiegogo page if you want to check out the marketing material. I will be covering a little bit of that, but I mostly want to go over the actual product itself. So I backed this almost 2 years ago, and it just now arrived after far too many delays, which I guess is to be expected of a product like this. And it's finally here, and it's actually a lot more interesting than I thought it would be. Going into this, I did not believe most of the marketing material, but I kind of wanted to have a pretty good Bluetooth headphone, because my experience with Bluetooth noise cancelling headphones is like the Sony XM4, and I really didn't like that headphone very much. I did not find the sound to be very good, even after a lot of EQ. So when seeing the marketing material, even though I did not believe most of it, I kind of expected this to at least be a decent Bluetooth headphone. But I'm pleasantly surprised. Starting with the build, it's a lot heavier than I expected it to be. It is a similar weight to the N90Q, which I believe is over 400 grams, so it's pretty close to that weight. And I believe it's a combination of plastic and metal. The bottom half here feels like either metal or some kind of metallized plastic. It does have metal on the adjustment, which is a very stiff adjustment, but it is pretty good and it goes pretty far out. The cups are huge on this for a portable headphone. Just to give you a bit of a comparison, I do have a chunky boy, and it actually is a very similar size to the LCD-XC, though this is actually slightly deeper, which makes for a very comfortable fit, combined with these some kind of fabric. I forgot how to pronounce it, but I'll probably just pop it up on the screen. It's definitely a better material than what you see on a lot of Bluetooth headphones as far as padding goes, and it has that on the headband as well, which is a fairly generous amount, and this has adequate swivel for getting a proper seal. As for the functionality, your volume control is plus and minus right here in these really large clicky buttons. Your power button's here. You also hold this down for your Bluetooth pairing, and that is to toggle your noise canceling. It's actually very intuitive when it's on the head, and it is way better than those touch-sensitive whatevers that most brands use nowadays, even if it's not particularly feature-rich. And this has both 3.5mm and Type-C. It can use both to play back audio. The built-in DAC will actually work through the Type-C connection, which is a good feature to have. Now, as for the actual selling points of the product, this is where things get kind of interesting. So I'll start with noise canceling. This has a dual driver design. I believe in the initial marketing, there was supposed to be a separate driver behind the primary driver, which sits right about here. And that was a dedicated driver for the noise canceling, so that when you're playing music through this, you're not getting any added distortion to your music caused by the noise canceling. I believe in practice, the driver is actually placed down here instead of like directly behind. And they claim that is a completely new thing. I believe there's a blue headphone that has a very similar dual driver setup. So nothing new, but it's not common practice. And actually using the headphone, it does appear to work as described, and I did not notice any added distortion to music playback when the noise canceling has to get quite aggressive. As for the aggressiveness of the noise canceling, it's not a very strong ANC. The Sony and Bose products at and slightly under this price point will have better noise canceling than this. But it's still pretty good, and I don't hear a lot of background noise associated with the noise canceling when it's active. There is one quirk though, and that is when it's trying to attenuate low rumbles. You can actually hear the driver attempting to cancel that out, and you just have this droning sub-bass sound playing through the headphone. That's a little annoying, and depending on your music, it might actually get in the way. But as long as you're not in an area where there's constant low frequencies, you should be okay. Now, the primary feature of this product is what they call truly transformed technology. Because in the companion app, you can set profiles for this headphone to change the sound to sound like other headphones. They have a couple profiles, which from my testing, I don't really like any of them except for the stock profile that this has. I'll get into that a little bit later, but the way it works is whenever you click on a profile, it will save that profile to the headphone itself, and it will use that profile regardless of the source you connect it to. So as an example, after you set a profile, you can then plug this into your Nintendo Switch via the 3.5mm, and it will actually play back on that profile that you set, which I think that is a pretty cool feature, but I have two problems with that. One, it appears that the headphone has to power on when music is playing through the analog port, because I noticed when I try to do that, it will play nothing for the first few seconds, and then it will start providing playback. It also appears that the battery does drain when you are running this analog powered off. So it does have to go into some kind of low power state to run the profile that you have set, and the battery life is pretty good, so I haven't actually managed to drain it to 0 yet. So I don't know what happens when the battery reaches 0, if it just does not play back anymore, or what it actually sounds like without any of the DSP running, if it even will run without any DSP active. The other problem I have with Truly Transform, even though it does work pretty well, are the limited amount of profiles currently available. I can see the reason why Titum would have gone for the profiles that they did. They're kind of hitting a lot of popular consumer products, but if they want to mimic products that actually sound good, they need to get some profiles that are like the Audi's Maxwell, maybe like the Folk House Stellia, perhaps even some ZMF headphones. I think that would really upgrade the potential for the truly transformed tech in this. Now, as for how it actually mimics the sound, the marketing material is a bit redundant on the areas that it mimics the sound qualities of other headphones. The best way I could describe how it works, if you've ever heard of Morphit by Tone Boosters, that is effectively what this is. I know the marketing material claims there's more added to it, but from my experience, it's not truly transforming. Because a lot of the sound staging and imaging properties of a headphone come from the head-related transfer function, or HRTF, and this does not properly compensate for that variable. So while the tuning does change to pretty much match the headphone that it is replicating, the actual sound staging characteristics of the headphone don't really change at all. But the tuning does change. So it's mostly acting as different tuning profiles and pretty much nothing more, because this is supposed to be replicating the distortion, harmonic resonance, attributes like that of other headphones. The quality of the sound does not degrade enough to be accurate, because some of the headphones that it's replicating are genuinely not actually that good. I did not notice the quality degrading enough to properly replicate those headphones. I know, foreshadowing. You'll have to watch the full sound review where I get into detail on that. So for the most part, I don't actually use the Truly Transform gimmick, at least not until there's some really well-tuned profiles on there. For now, I stick with the default, which is the Titum UHD reference, something like that. So for the sound review, that is what I will be using to test that, because to me it sounds the best. So as for sound, I will get into the more objectively quantifiable aspect of it in this video, that being the tuning. Now, I don't have a measurement rig to actually show you a fancy squiggly line, but I am counting the Titum reference profile as the tuning of this headphone. Though perhaps it sounds different when it's completely out of battery. I don't actually know yet, because I haven't drained it yet. So I ran a sine wave sweep through this, and this actually is a well-tuned product. Even a lot of high-end headphones that I have listened to, because I went to Can Jam Dallas this year and listened to a whole bunch of the high-end models that are incredibly expensive, including that $60,000 thing from Warwick. And even those headphones, most of the ones I listen to, don't have the smoothest of tuning. Like, there's usually a peak or dip somewhere in the frequency response. But this actually has a very competitive tuning that is surprisingly smooth. Now, again, that could just be because this headphone has a very good DSP profile, but I did not notice any peaks in the frequency response running a sine wave sweep, which is very impressive and gives this a very natural sound. But there are two quirks, and it does actually have a bit of coloration to the tuning that I'll get into. Quirk number one, around 3 to 4 kilohertz, there is a slight dip, but my HRTF usually has a dip right there on just about every headphone, so that's probably just my ears and not actually a fault of the product. What could be considered a fault of the product is the treble. So it's very smooth, not peaky, up until you get to 14 kilohertz, and it is a cliff that it just falls off of. Like, it is the steepest roll off that I have heard. And any treble past 14K is not there. I've tried to correct this with EQ. Even putting like a 10 decibel shelf there, it's still not to the level that I would actually like. Because I like a lot of upper treble past 10K, and this only goes to 14K, and then needs excessive amounts of EQ to bring the rest of it up. A lot of people will not find that annoying, but for someone like me, that is a quirk that I do find slightly annoying. However, that is really the only problem with the sound. It's exceptional on just about every other part of the frequency response. So over Bluetooth, I really don't even EQ it because there's not enough headroom for me to correct the treble when running this over Bluetooth because the amp's not powerful enough. Surprisingly hard to drive, just as a side note. So if you try to do a lot of EQ on this, you might find yourself running at max volume or not having enough volume over Bluetooth. And even wired connected to my desktop amplifier, it's still cutting through a lot of headroom compared to my other headphones. So this is a harder to drive product. I don't know if it's because the passive DSP through the analog perhaps makes this harder to drive. I really don't know exactly why. They don't have a spec sheet on the sensitivity of this, which is kind of weird, but it is a little harder to drive than the average headphone. But if you're not annoyed by the steep treble roll-off, you're probably not going to have a problem with the default tuning of this. Now, several of the backers did complain that this sounds muffled. That's probably why, because it doesn't have that treble extension. And even testing the different profiles, it seems like those still don't have the same treble that the actual headphones being replicated have. I imagine they are intentionally keeping the treble from being too bright because they likely used a measurement rig to test the frequency response of the headphones they're replicating, and treble can vary quite a bit on different ears. So I imagine they're just rolling it off just to be on the safe side, which I think is a smart move. It's just going to come across as a bit dark to some people. And that is how I would describe the tuning overall. This is a dark sound. It's a bit bass boosted, but it's not aggressive like the Sony's. So what I like to do is drop the bass by about 2 decibels, and I find it sounds just about right there. And of course, I try my best to fix the treble as much as I can, but don't always have headroom. This headphone is well-rounded enough in the tuning that a bass and treble shelf are really all you need to get this sounding just right. Because once you do get that balance the way that best matches your listening preferences, the tuning on this is incredible. Like, it's so smooth, it represents every frequency just about right, and requires very little correction to execute that. That's a drastic difference from something like an LCD XC that needs a ton of correction to sound proper, because the tuning on this is just not great at all. So credit where it's due, this is a well-tuned product. It may not be exactly to taste for a lot of people, but it is very easy to correct. And finally, as for the price of the product, the early backers paid, I think, $220 for this US, and the retail version, assuming this does make it to retail, is supposed to be $500 US, which that's a fair bit for a portable headphone. But I think with the quality of the tuning combined with the good ergonomics because the comfort on this is actually quite good. I don't know if I mentioned it, but comfort-wise, I can go easily 3 hours without really any problems of continual use, which for me, that is something quite exceptional for a closed back to do that well at. But 500 USD is a lot, but I think you can still get it at early backer pricing because the Indiegogo page is still up. Now, I don't know when you would receive the product. I waited almost 2 years for this thing. But if you do get the retail version, all of the additional profiles you will have to pay for. I don't know how much they cost because I have the early access version, so I get all of the profiles free of charge. So generally speaking, I think this is actually a good product. I was not expecting it to be as good as it is because it's actually well tuned. Surprise. It's well built. Again, surprise. And it's very comfortable. Again, a surprise. As for the subjective sound, I will have the dedicated video for that, but if you want a TLDR, though I haven't given enough time to really test it, the sound quality is exceptional. And especially for the early backer price, I don't think there's a Bluetooth headphone at that price point that would likely sound as good as this does. Even just on tuning alone, it's very competitive. So even if you don't subscribe to the idea that, you know, higher end headphones can have better resolution or whatever, and that the only thing that matters is this squiggly line that people measure, this is still a competitive product, even disregarding the subjective sound quality. So yeah, that's the Titum headphone. I happen to think it's pretty good. Maybe even has the potential to shake up the market some. The price point it's at, it's very competitive, even if it would still be a bit steep for some people. And in case you haven't realized, this is the first video I've made on this channel. I was waiting for this to arrive to launch this channel, and it just so happened to far exceed my expectations. And I definitely expected this review to go entirely different. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you want to be notified of the review of the subjective sound, you can subscribe and click the notification bell to be immediately notified, hopefully, when that drops. It should be within a few weeks of this video launching. And I guess I will see y'all later.